The US fought a war to defend South Korea from communism. But now, South Korea might be turning its back on the US in favor of the Chinese Communist Party. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. The US and South Korea have been close friends since the Korean War, when the US defended them from communist invasion. But today, things aren't going so well between the US and South Korea. And that's because South Korea's president, Moon Jae-in, is more concerned with making China happy. Moon Jae-in visited Washington last week to meet with President Joe Biden. It's Biden's second meeting with a head of state since taking office. They talked about cooperation on a range of issues, things like vaccines, technology, energy, trade, and climate change. But what they didn't seem to discuss is China. The People's Republic of China wasn't mentioned even once in their joint statement. See, South Korea's president doesn't want to criticize the Chinese Communist Party. And some see it as a betrayal of American interests. You see, geographically, South Korea is in a dangerous spot. It's right up against three major authoritarian threats: China, Russia, and North Korea. South Korea is the lone liberal democracy of the four. It's a huge success story, going from a poor backwater country as recently as the 1970s to a high-tech country with the 12th biggest economy in the world today. And like Japan, South Korea is an important U.S. trading partner that generally shares American values. Generally. Not when it comes to freedom of speech for activists, though. Or when it comes to freedom of the press for critics of the government. But South Korea's economy relies heavily on trade with China, which accounts for more than a quarter of the country's exports. And South Korea remembers how much it hurts to do anything that offends China. In 2017, the Chinese Communist Party was furious that South Korea deployed the US's THAAD missile defense system. And as punishment, the Communist Party banned all Chinese group travel there, devastating South Korea's tourism industry. And one of South Korea's biggest companies, Lotte, faced boycotts and store shutdowns in China. There's an important lesson here. When you depend on China for money and trade, the Chinese Communist Party can control you. The solution? Don't do anything to anger the Chinese Communist Party. That's essentially President Moon Jae-in's stance. But at the same time as playing nice with China, President Moon also wants to maintain South Korea's profitable relationship with the US. That's why Moon is playing a careful balancing game to avoid antagonizing both while reaping all the benefits. But is he pandering too much to China? More after the break. Welcome back. When Moon Jae-in took office back in 2017, the THAAD controversy immediately set the tone for how his administration would maintain relations with China. To appease China, his foreign minister laid out the three no's. No additional THAAD deployments, no participation in US-led regional defense systems, and no trilateral military alliance with the US and Japan. South Korea also refused to join the Quad, an alliance of the US, Japan, Australia, and India meant to counter China. But maybe that's good, because if you add a fifth member, you gotta call it the Pent. And if you add Taiwan, it'd have to be the Hex, and no one wants that. And that was for all of you who like geometry humor. So to avoid angering China, South Korea won't join these other countries when it comes to security. But the Moon administration announced that South Korea would at least partially join the Quad to cooperate on vaccines, climate change, and new technologies. But that still excludes anything to do with security. For example, South Korea has not joined the US-led Clean Network Initiative. That's the plan to keep Chinese components out of 5G networks around the world, to prevent espionage and control. In fact, LG, one of South Korea's biggest tech companies, sources 5G components from Huawei, a Chinese company that's a known security threat. And to further appease the Chinese Communist Party, Moon Jae-in has stayed silent on China's human rights abuses. His government has not expressed support for Hong Kong or Uyghurs in Xinjiang, nor did it support Canada's initiative to get China to release 2 detained Canadians. But, according to China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Moon expressed his heartfelt congratulations as the CCP celebrates its 100th anniversary this year. The South Korean government is agreeing to enrich the Korea-China Strategic Cooperative Partnership and strengthen the foundation for future development. And in Moon's second year in office, he joined China's Belt and Road Initiative. So Moon wants to play the U.S. and China. According to him, South Korea-U.S. and South Korea-China relations are all equally important. To his credit, Moon and Biden mentioned the Taiwan Strait in their joint statement. The two leaders say that both countries will commit to maintaining an inclusive, free, and open Indo-Pacific, and emphasize the importance of preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, which makes sense because a lot of Korea's imports and exports go through that region on container ships. But other than that, Moon Jae-in doesn't want to push China on anything, which made it super uncomfortable when a reporter last week asked him this question.
I'm curious if the two of you have offered any assurances behind the scenes to Taiwan, and if President Biden has pushed you to take a tougher stance when it comes to China's posture towards Taiwan.
Good luck.
Well, fortunately, there wasn't such pressure. But as for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, we agreed how important that region is. Especially considering the special characteristics between China and Taiwan, we decided to work more closely on this matter going forward.
Well, that was a non-answer, and South Korea wants to keep it that way. Earlier this year, the South Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that both South Korea and China believe the continuous promotion and management of friendly sentiments between them is very important for stable relations. And that's politics. But when it comes to public sentiment in South Korea about China, it's a whole different ballgame. I'll get to that after the break. Welcome back. South Korea wants to maintain stable relations with China, but that doesn't mean the general public is ignorant of what's at stake. A study by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, a think tank based in Illinois, showed public opinion about China is low in both the U.S. and South Korea. A vast majority of Americans and Koreans view China as more of a security threat than a security partner, and as more of an economic threat than an economic partner. Korean cancel culture is also going rampant against China. The K-drama Joseon Exorcist was canceled because it downplayed ancient Korean culture and replaced it with Chinese culture. True Beauty was under fire for Chinese product placement. And the lead actor of Vincenzo apologized for allowing a Chinese brand bibimbap to appear in the show because bibimbap is Korean. A lot of South Koreans are also angry at China for claiming that kimchi is Chinese. Do not mess with Koreans and their kimchi. Just don't. Now that stuff may not seem like a big deal, other than the kimchi. But look at it in the context of the things I mentioned earlier. The Chinese regime punishing South Korea's tourism industry over politics, or promoting a boycott of Korean products in China. Now you can see why these seemingly small things stir up anger that was already there. So there's a mismatch between strong anti-China sentiment in the public and South Korea's current foreign policy. Despite all the hate on China, Moon is trying not to be explicitly anti-China while also appeasing the U.S.
Yeah, I think the summit was very useful in not being against anything. This was not an anti-China summit. This was a pro-values, pro-cooperation summit.
Right, but if you're willing to side with the Chinese Communist Party, doesn't that go against American interests? And that could be a betrayal of America. And that's a long-term challenge with Moon Jae-in's position, what's called strategic ambiguity. The director of the China program at the Stimson Center says neutrality between the U.S. and China will inevitably have a detrimental effect on the credibility and utility of the U.S.-Korea alliance. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, a think tank in Washington, D.C., gives two reasons why strategic ambiguity will backfire on South Korea. With the U.S., South Korea creates misunderstandings and distrust when it looks like it's siding with China. With China, South Korea's leverage with it diminishes when Beijing perceives that Washington and Seoul are not on the same page. The reason why Moon doesn't want to anger China, however, is because his biggest foreign policy goal is peace with North Korea. He's been putting a lot of effort into facilitating peace through relieving sanctions. And China presents itself as an important partner who can help with that. So Moon Jae-in has to make a tough choice. And he only has one more year in office to decide what kind of legacy he's going to leave. But how he approaches China and North Korea will really affect how the U.S. deals with the region. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. And please, consider supporting America Uncovered through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Go to patreon.com/AmericaUncovered to learn more. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. This is America Uncovered.